Well, I'll hurry then. Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Tonight, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 1090, the Retail Investor Protection Act, which would amend the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934 to provide important protections for retail customers, and really to update the act where it properly should be based upon today's market climate. We're joined tonight by the young chairman from Dallas, Texas, Chairman of Financial Services, Jeb Henserling, and the ranking member, Maxine Waters from Los Angeles. Ms. Waters, I've been advised, is on her way. We welcome a survey of your testimony, and without objection, any written remarks will be placed on the record, and we'd appreciate you leaving anything that you brought in writing for our awesome stenographer. And before we go any further, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to defer to the ranking member of the Rules Committee, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Thank you,
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to be the acting ranking member. This bill is one that I've had the opportunity to work on this issue. It has joint jurisdiction between the Education and Workforce Committee, the Financial Services Committee, and if I'm not mistaken, the Ways and Means Committee as well. We're pleased to welcome the lead committee to testify before us today. What the Department of Labor is attempting to do in this case is effectively to promulgate rules to do what the title of this bill is, namely protect retail investors, making sure that conflicts of interest don't arise between agents that are selling products to investors, making sure that proper disclosure occurs, and that investors have the opportunity to go into products that make sense as they plan for their own retirement. Effectively, while this bill deals with the jurisdiction of agencies and in effect says, oh well, it's SEC rather than the Department of Labor, what this effectively would do is it would kill the current rulemaking process with the Secretary of Labor is in the final stages of completing with regard to doing precisely what the title of the bill is, protecting retail investors. So if this bill were to become law, and it won't become law, let me point out, because the President, of course, is opposed, it will not muster sufficient votes to override, but were it to somehow become law, it would effectively end years of efforts by the Department of Labor to get this rule right. They've had thousands of comments. The Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, has been on the Hill a number of times, meeting with me and my colleagues and other stakeholders to make sure that the final rule not only protects investors, but it is also workable from a financial services perspective. I'm confident that as the process of that finalization occurs, it will balance the various stakeholders and protect consumers and ensure that families of all economic means continue to have access to financial products to save for their own retirement. And that's why it's important that our colleagues oppose this effort to thwart the effort in under the guise of an interjurisdictional agency dispute and reassign it to an agency that, even if they had the will to begin the effort, would have to start back on square one, whereas the Department of Labor has nearly completed the process, and I'm happy to yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you've now heard both sides teed up. And I think that the chairman, as the chairman of the committee, has a handle not only on this important issue, but certainly I've had many people come to my office for a number of years talking with me about the impact and the reason why I think you've done this. We're delighted that you're here. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Acting Ranking Member Paulus. Members of the Rules Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on H.R. 1090, the Retail Investor Protection Act. Before I begin, I'd like to commend the work of the gentlelady from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, who's led the charge on this issue since 2013 on this legislation to help protect retirement security, affordable advice, and investment choices for low and moderate income Americans. In fact, Mr. Chairman, all Americans. Millions of Americans rely upon financial advisors to provide them with retirement guidance and assurance, especially during market downturns and volatility like we have seen in the market over the past several years. They trust their advisors to help them save for retirement, save for their children's education, and help them achieve a part of the American dream. Without advice from financial advisors, tens of billions of dollars in retirement savings could be lost, putting families' financial independence and quality of life at risk. Since the Department of Labor issued its most recent proposal to expand the definition of fiduciary, Analysis of the rule's impact has led to only one conclusion. It will clearly result in less access to investment advice, higher cost, and lower returns for retail investors trying to save for retirement. The Department of Labor's proposed rule will make that advice either unavailable or unaffordable for millions of American families, especially those with low and moderate incomes. It will limit the right of Americans to choose the advisor they want in the investment products that they currently enjoy. It will lead to higher fees for all, and some brokers may simply stop providing this investment advice to the less affluent altogether. Unfortunately, those hurt the most will be those, again, with low and moderate incomes. Now, you will likely hear that the rule is necessary because American investors are supposedly losing dollars due to conflicts of interest, but when you peel back the onion on the Department of Labor's analysis, you will see it has a number of critical flaws. And as our committee heard testimony back in September, a study conducted by the Investment Company Institute found that the department's proposal, if adopted, quote, will result in net losses to investors of $109 billion over 10 years. Indeed, a 2011 report by the Department of Labor itself estimated that consumers who invest without professional advice make investment errors that collectively cost them, Mr. Chairman, $114 billion per year, far exceeding the purported benefit of the DOL proposal. Simply put, without access to advice from financial advisors, families stand to lose tens of billions of dollars in retirement savings, jeopardizing their goals of financial independence and retirement security. We've already seen the harm this type of rule can cause. 2 years ago, the United Kingdom tried a similar conflicted financial advisor rule, leading to tens of thousands losing their financial advisor and a 23% reduction in the number of retail investor accounts. An advice gap, they call it in the UK, for those investors who are now unable to receive the financial advice because their accounts are considered too small. This has resulted in the British government having to be forced to undertake a review of the extent to which their rule has actually harmed small investors. The UK is a nation of 64 million, the US a nation of 320 million. Imagine how a similar rule, what harm it would cause our constituents. Now, the Department of Labor rule does not explicitly prohibit commission-based compensation, but the rule's best interest contract exemption, known as BICE, financial advisors say is so unworkable that it is unlikely that many will avail themselves of it, creating a similar result as we saw in the UK. So again, the DOL fiduciary rule will simply hurt the low and moderate income Americans that the rule theoretically is designed to help. And why should the government force our constituents to rely upon essentially a robo-advisor? Shouldn't they themselves have the opportunity to choose? The harm to investors notwithstanding, Labor Secretary Perez has repeatedly reassured critics that the Labor Department heard their concerns and material changes would be made in the final rule, but it is hard to give these statements much credence when the process that has produced the rule has been so deficient. The Department of Labor has failed to sufficiently coordinate with the SEC and avail itself of the SEC's expertise in regulating financial advisors and products. As then SEC Commissioner Dan Gallagher stated in his own comment letter, the process and substance of the proposal, quote, reflect a lack of concern for the Commission's views on these issues, unquote. Secretary Perez has rejected bipartisan calls for the Labor Department to re-propose the rule for public comment, even after public hearings exposed the rule's many shortcomings. With little hope that the process will rectify the profound defects in the rule that will harm millions of American families working to save for retirement, Congress needs to enact the Retail Investor Protection Act to stop this misguided initiative. The bill then will ensure that hardworking families and individuals throughout the country who are trying to save for retirement, save for their children's education, or save for their first home, are not harmed by this confusing, costing regulation coming out of Washington. And despite claims to the contrary, the bill does not preclude the adoption of a uniform fiduciary standard. It simply defers to the Securities and Exchange Commission's expertise and promulgating the standards of care. As a former SEC General Counsel wrote, quote, "Surely retail security investment is not within the core competence of the Department of Labor. These choices are of pressing national concern. Nothing less than the comfort and security of the nation's aging population, and retirement is at stake." In closing, let us not forget what this is really all about. It's about people like Betty, a retired school teacher in Maryland, who 10 years shy of retirement was far short of her investment goals after keeping her retirement funds in a bank account for 30 years. With the help of a financial advisor, Betty reinvested her money, is now retired and living comfortably off of her investments. It's about Todd, the founder of a title and escrow company here in Washington, who stated, quote, "I'm a proud small business owner who has been successful despite the recent economic downturn. Part of our winning formula is the ability to compensate our employees with retirement plans and low-cost investment advice. I'm afraid, however, that the DOL's new fiduciary rule will cut them off from receiving critically important investment education and materials on investment options. If that happens, my employees will be left in the dark with little or no guidance on how to best invest their savings," unquote. As one witness told our committee, Mr. Chairman, simply put, American investors need more personalized assistance and more options with respect to retirement planning and savings, not less. As members of this body, we have the privilege and responsibility to fight for people like Betty and small business employees like Todd's. By advancing Representative Wagner's bill, H.R. 1090, the House will provide Americans with more choices and greater freedom to save for an opportunity to grasp their portion of the American dream. I hope this House will come together to stand with lower and middle income savers and prevent government bureaucrats from denying them access to reliable and affordable retirement saving options. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Most welcome your preparation. Ms. Waters, welcome back to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you're here. Without objection, the gentlewoman's now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and our acting. Thank you, Mr. And all of the committee members, the legislation before you, the so-called Retail Investor Protection Act will halt the Department of Labor's current efforts to require financial advisors to act in their client's best interest under a fiduciary standard. Why is the fiduciary standard important? It is essential because it requires financial advisors to put their customers' needs ahead of their desire for profits. It will mean that advisors must provide the best possible guidance to an individual saving for retirement or college, not advice that simply provides them with the highest fees or commissions. This bill, H.R. 1090, would stop that effort. It would prohibit the DOL from taking any further action on this important issue until the Securities and Exchange Commission jumps through administrative hurdles and finalizes its own fiduciary rule, something the SEC has been unable to do since explicitly getting the authority in the Dodd-Frank Act, and by all accounts is unlikely to do so anytime soon, as the Commission is mired in gridlock. As you know, we have considered similar versions of this bill in past Congresses, but this bill would impose additional cost-benefit analysis requirements on the SEC and require the agency to report to Congress on a host of considerations, including the impact on brokers' profits. More importantly, now, unlike in past Congresses, we have a serious proposal by the DOL that was subject to a 164-day public comment period and 4 days of multi-panel hearings. And many members of Congress, including myself, have submitted comments to the department and had many conversations with the Secretary and the administration. Now, as the department thoughtfully considers our and others' comments and seeks to address legitimate concerns as it moves to finalize the rule, Republicans will have us consider H.R. 1090 and further delay important protections that our nation's workers and retirees have been waiting more than 5 years for. In the meantime, Americans lose an estimated $17 billion a year, or $47 million a day, in their hard-earned savings as a direct result of conflicted investment advice and loopholes in the law. While the retirement advice landscape has changed dramatically, with savers now forced to take a more active role over their accounts, the laws governing retirement advice have failed to keep pace. In fact, the law hasn't been meaningfully updated in 40 years. At this time, loopholes have emerged that have been exploited by some financial advisors who do not have to act in the best interest of their clients. When, for example, their advice is provided on a one-time basis or is provided on assets in individual retirement accounts or IRAs. The department's proposal, a more robust version of its 2010 proposal, would close these loopholes by requiring persons providing retirement advice to put the interest of their clients ahead of their own and abide by a fiduciary duty. This common sense and much-needed update now has broad support among financial services groups, public interest, civil rights, and consumer organizations, labor unions, and even some investment advisors who are already willing to provide advice to savers under a fiduciary standard. But as I, like these groups, support the department's proposal, I'm opposed to efforts like H.R. 1090, which is designed to thwart and delay it. The AARP, the Consumer Federation of America, Consumers Union, Public Citizen, Americans for Financial Reform, National Council of La Raza, and Financial Planning Coalition are all opposed to the bill, and Democrats overwhelmingly reject H.R. 1090 when it came up for a vote in the Financial Services Committee. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask that all amendments be made in order. Thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon.
Ms. Waters,
You're
thank you.
back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that Mrs. Wagner presented before the committee last year or last session. Is that true?
It was in the last Congress, Mr. Chairman.
And she presented this, and this was brought to the floor of the House through the Rules Committee. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
And we saw a vote that took place. Was that a bipartisan vote or a partisan vote?
That was a bipartisan vote, Mr.
Bipartisan vote. Would you anticipate that this would be a bipartisan vote also?
Well, I would hope so. It's essentially the same bill that it has been in the past, a few minor changes. So I would hope that we would have a bipartisan vote on the floor.
But in fact, there is a realization that as we approach really financial integrity issues, turning to probably someone for advice is a better answer than you doing it yourself.
Well, indeed, as I said in my opening statement, Mr. Chairman, the Department of Labor has their own study. Let me see if I can find it here, but essentially saying that lack of financial advice has caused those who do not use financial advice, professional financial advice, that is costing them over $100 billion a year. We would seemingly want to encourage more professional financial advice instead of less, particularly when we look at the challenges that we have to the Social Security Trust Fund. You know, if you read the report of the Medicare and Social Security trustees, you know that it does not have long-term actuarial balance. And so if you want to shore it up, we've got to make sure that people have their own retirement security to supplement Social Security. And so I would hope we would want more professional advice. And unfortunately, the DLO proposed rulemaking in its current form is going to harm that, and particularly to low and moderate income investors, because they don't have enough money to meet the financial business model. And they ought to have the choice whether or not to pay the commission or pay a flat monthly fee. Most choose commissions.
So they quite probably might not be able to find that professional advice that they would choose.
Well, Mr. Chairman, again, that was what happened in the United Kingdom when they passed a similar bill. And they're having now to stop and go back and reassess because they had a 23% drop in retail accounts. Tens of thousands of people lost their investment advisor, which means they're also probably in a position to risk losing their retirement savings, their ability to send a kid to college, maybe the ability to buy a home.
Yeah, the hard-earned work. Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our colleagues for being here today. I listened pretty intently to the comments that Mr. Henseling made today, and I want to say I associate myself with them. I will add that this summer, particularly during the August recess, I had visits from a lot of people to my office and have continued to have a lot of people come to see me about this rule who are in the fiduciary field. And interestingly enough, I've had a lot of the public contact me about what I thought might be a fairly obscure issue, and I was a little surprised at some of the meetings I had at home where people raised the issue about these rules and how it would impact them personally. People that the chairman described, people with modest incomes who rely on the help of local people who give them advice on how to manage their money and invest their funds. I think this is a rule in search of a problem that doesn't exist. I think the American people are tired of this administration trying to manage every aspect of our lives, and as the chairman said, taking away the choices that the American people have. And so I very much support this bill and appreciate the chairman's description. I think he gave a very articulate reason for why this bill is needed. I said before, I like my friend from California very much. I appreciate the comments Mr. Polis made, but I think we need to pass this bill. I think we need to stop that very bad rule in its tracks, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit to the record a statement of administrative policy.
By objection, it'll be entered in the record.
Thank you. And the statement in part says, if the president were presented with H.R. 1090, his senior advisors would recommend he veto the bill. And we've been down this road before. We know in the last Congress there was not close to 2/3. I don't expect this to have close to 2/3. So this is another example of this House spinning its wheels again when we're approaching a government shutdown, when our transportation funding is expiring. We're considering a bill that will not become law. My question for Mr. Henseling is, why not wait until we see what the final rules are? I have got to meet with Secretary Perez. I know he's been very diligent about a multi-stakeholder process involving the financial services industry, involving consumer protection organizations, and really, frankly, listening to members on both sides of the aisle with regards to their input. How are we so sure, or how are you so sure that you won't be happy with the final product, that rather than simply wait until it's done and in final publication before trying to prevent it from occurring, why try to do this now before we see how much they've improved?
Well, I would hope that people on your side of the aisle would want to defend Dodd-Frank, and Dodd-Frank gave the SEC permissive ability to come forward with this rule. And given the expertise of the Securities and Exchange Commission, we have a strong view it belongs there. It is our committee, and in this case, SEC, that has jurisdiction over the people who promulgate the products, the people who sell the products. There's this one thin sliver that goes to the Department of Labor. We don't think they have the same expertise, and frankly, we think the process has been pretty flawed so far of the DOL, and it is pretty telling to me that they said they're not going to repropose the rule for public comment. They're just going to make changes and then impose it. I believe that to be a flawed process, and something as important as the retirement security for millions of Americans should not be trifled with. And unless they make radical major surgery to the rule that they're coming up with, I think there's a lot of people, a bipartisan group, believe that millions are going to be harmed.
Well, many members on my side of the aisle, including those of us who oppose this bill, have been very critical of elements of the initial draft rules. In fact, more than 90 Democrats have written to the Secretary regarding changes we'd like to see made. We have found the Secretary to be welcoming of that input, to engage with us. There is nothing to stop the SEC from acting. However, they have not acted. And that was my second question, which is I want to pose to both of you. I'll first go to Ms. Waters. Is this an important issue that we're trying to solve with regard to these conflicts of interest? Certainly, I've heard a lot of horror stories from people that have been placed in financial products that did not serve them well in their retirement, that simply because of commission structures that they didn't have transparency to see. So the first part of it is this a legitimate problem? And the second part is, do you have any confidence that the SEC would sort of unilaterally take this up if Department of Labor were to say we're done with it, or if this bill were to become law?
Well, Mr. Polis, let me just say that it's very interesting the way this bill is constructed. It's constructed in such a way as to basically rely on the SEC not being able to move because it is mired down in all of its responsibilities with basically my friends here on the opposite side of the aisle doing everything they can possibly do to keep from funding the SEC properly so that it can do its job. And they add to this the cost-benefit analysis, which they know will tie them up in court and cause them to have to spend more money from a budget that is inadequate. So they've approached this from the standpoint of not really substantial arguments about why they think there's something wrong with the rule, but simply they have approached it from, let's just tie their hands and keep them from moving forward. Aside from that, it is extremely important that the average investor have an opportunity to be treated fairly and that they know and understand who their advisor is and what kind of commissions they're receiving and who they're basically working for. This is about protection of the average investor in ways that all of us should be concerned about. One of the things that has bothered me since the 2008 meltdown that we had that caused us to have a recession is I know many individuals and women, single women in particular, who lost a lot of money in their 401ks when we went through our recession. If there's anything pathetic and pitiful you want to see, it is an individual, and particularly a woman alone, who is depending on their investments for their retirement purposes. And all of a sudden, at 70 years old, you end up with nothing, no ability to get a job, and no ability to take care of yourself. It is frightening. And so I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that these advisors are not conflicted, that they're not simply given advice based on the highest commission that they could receive. And listen, even if you didn't believe any of this, wouldn't it be more responsible to make sure that if you erred on the side of those who are absolutely dependent on their investment? So with that.
Thank you. And I want to pose a similar question. Mr. Hensley, in the other committee I serve on, the Educational Workforce Committee, we've had some hearings on this topic, and among the good actors in the financial service industry, we're told that many of them already do many of these best practices, are already set up in such a way that they are either do comply with prospective rules or could. We also hear from the Democratic witnesses about some of the horror stories that exist, and there's been several that have been cited in terms of people that have been placed under some duress into ill-fitting financial products that caused jeopardy with regard to their own savings. So the first part of the question is, again, is there a cause for whatever agency action? Is there a need here for rules that address conflict of interest, transparency, all these things we're talking about? And then secondly, what degree of confidence you have that the SEC would even take this up and move expeditiously if we were to thwart the Department of Labor's efforts through your bill?
Well, I don't mind asking multi-part questions, but I have a
two
little bit more
parts.
difficult
Yeah.
answering. So, first of all, there is FINRA Rule 2111, which already deals with disclosure matters, deals with conflict of interest matters. And although I don't have the committee transcript, we had a hearing on this not long ago. I don't remember the Democrat witness saying that FINRA Rule 2111 was somehow insufficient. And I don't remember the Democrat witness being critical of the rule. I'm sure the ranking member can remind me perhaps otherwise. I haven't heard that evidence. Conflicts of interest are serious. Disclosure is serious. That's why we have already rules on the books from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, to provide for these matters. And for those who fail to abide by them, they can be fined. They can lose their license. If there's fraud involved, they can actually be prosecuted by the Department of Justice. So there is already a rather serious disclosure and conflict of interest regime that is already on the books. But again, I hearken back, so we have not received compelling testimony within the House Financial Services Committee that people are being ill-served. We've asked for the information from the SEC and DOL. I don't think that such evidence exists. Again, the greatest parallel we have is what happened in the UK.
So given okay, and I think what you're saying, you're not convinced that there's the need for further protections in this area. So
I wouldn't call them protections. When you take
well,
away people's
further,
right to have
whatever
a
we call
financial
them.
advisor, I don't think you're protecting them.
So the second part of that is given that is this bill a legitimate effort to engage the SEC with providing further consumer protections in this area, or is it more of an effort to thwart the Department of Labor, knowing that the SEC is unlikely to move forward with new rules in this area?
Well, again, under Dodd-Frank, the SEC was granted permissive authority to promulgate these rules. Chair White has
I don't think
indicated,
anybody questions their authority, but we're talking about is this a genuine effort to encourage the SEC to do something in this area to protect consumers, or is it simply an effort to thwart the Department of Labor?
well, I would just be repeating my earlier answer. We do not believe that DOL has the expertise. We do believe that the SEC has the expertise. Should they choose to promulgate a rule, then I'm sure our committee will have hearings, and there will be those who may be opposed to the rule, and maybe those who are favorable to the rule, but we haven't seen the evidence yet. We would like for the SEC to investigate and show us conclusive evidence that low and moderate income investors will not be harmed by seeing their fees skyrocket and their investment advisors go away. We have not been presented that evidence. If that evidence exists, I hope the SEC would present it, and if they did, I'd assume they would go forward on a rulemaking.
Thank you. And Ms. Waters, did you have any response?
No, my response is simply how I started out a moment ago, and that is, this is not, in my estimation, a sincere desire to get the SEC to move and move quickly. As I said, my colleagues really understand that the SEC is overwhelmed and that they're not funded properly. And the same people who talk about the SEC doing this job are ones who fight very hard to keep them from getting the funds that they need. And the cost-benefit analysis that they impose upon them causes them to have to spend even more money to defend their decisions in court. So I don't see that as a real concern that somehow the SEC is so much better to do this, and if we just leave them alone, they will get it done. I don't believe that at all. What I really believe is that we really do need to accept the responsibility of protecting consumers from advisors who would not be acting in their best interest. It is a fiduciary responsibility that I think makes good sense, and whether you're talking about the people in your lives, your neighbors, your constituents, the monies that could be lost and the harm that would be done to folks who end up with advisors who are not taking their best interests into, you know, their concerns is something that we should all be concerned about.
And in conclusion, I just want to say that even if, of course, again, this bill won't become law, the president's mentioned he'd veto it, and I doubt it'll reach his desk, even if it were to become law, if there were to, if the SEC were to legitimately begin a process around rulemaking around protection, it would be unlikely to be completed during the term of this presidency. So I think that, again, this can certainly be seen as an effort to thwart this particular president from being able to enact rules to protect consumers during his tenure, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hitchling, I want to thank you for moving this legislation that Ms. Wagner's put before us. This isn't a jurisdiction policy-wise of the subcommittee I chair, but we fund the Department of Labor. And so we've spent quite a bit of time on appropriations looking at this, and have been deluged by a very unusual number and array of people in the financial services industries that aren't normally in our shop. And I share Ms. Fox's experience. I've had this in my district office. I've had it up here. And I couldn't agree more with the point you make that this is an agency that is not suited to issue this regulation, does not have the expertise, does not have the history, does not have the personnel that it needs to embark on something like this. The SEC is the appropriate place, and if there's some reason why it hasn't acted, then that's something the administration should deal with the SEC. We should not resort to an end run in the Department of Labor, which is just simply not suited to do this. When I've got people that have pioneered low-cost investing for the average American, people like Vanguard and Fidelity and some of these, and then I turn around and I've got, you know, gilt-edge investment firms, and then I go home and I've got individual practitioners on the street, all of whom will give you chapter and verse about how this will make fees go higher and make services more difficult for low and modest income people to get. You know, I can't find anybody for this thing outside the Department of Labor. You literally can't. And I can assure you this, I hope your bill does succeed. It has had bipartisan support. This only has, by the way, partisan support for what the administration is doing. There is bipartisan opposition, concerned by multiple members who are hearing exactly the same thing, whether you represent a deep blue district or a ruby red district. People in the financial services industries are contacting you, telling you what the consequences are going to be for the people you represent. So I think the legislation's needed. I think you'll have strong bipartisan support, and I'll go you one better. You know, in the bill, which has passed our committee, has not gone to the floor, in Labor Edge, we just simply defunded the ability for them to go ahead. I think the Senate bill has done exactly the same thing. So we would much prefer your approach to work. We think the legislative remedy is the best, but I can assure you this will be an area of considerable contention, and we will use, from an Appropriations Committee standpoint, the tools that we have to try and make sure that this ill-advised rule does not go ahead. And let me just add, I have a lot of respect for Secretary Perez. He is, as my friend says, a very capable, good guy. But again, this is an area where I think they're moving into that they are not remotely prepared to handle. And the product and the reaction that we get is enough to me to demonstrate we ought to pull back and wait on the SEC to do what's their job instead of try to end run this and basically use the time clock. The administration is coming to an end, so we have to get this done. Well, this is pretty important stuff. And as you pointed out in your testimony, people can lose tens of billions of dollars in retirement savings because they won't get any advice at all. It'll be the people, believe me, Warren Buffett will have the best financial advice ever, but somebody with a $50,000 401k is going to get zippo, nothing. And those persons, again, if you're at a Vanguard or Fidelity with a very low cost option, the idea you'd get in between the ability of people to get decent advice that are desperately in need of it is just beyond me. So applaud the effort. Don't particularly have any questions because I've spent more time on this than I ever expected to spend on it when I became Labor H Subcommittee Chairman. But it does concern me, and I'm glad your committee is moving.
Will the gentleman yield?
I certainly yield to my friend.
Thank you. I'm not so sure that You heard some of those who have been lobbying and working very hard against this bill. You said you had not found anybody. The AARP is not an insignificant organization.
I know, I'm a member. Sadly, I'm age eligible.
The Consumer Federation of America, the Consumers Union, Public Citizens, Americans for Financial Reform, the National Council of La Raza, and Financial Planning Coalition. So there are a significant number of
There
organizations.
are some, but there's almost nobody in the business of doing this that is for this, that thinks it's worthwhile, and they have significant problems with the rule, as written. It's over 100 pages the last time I looked. Yield to my friend, the chairman.
Well, I could just, if I could, add two more groups' voices to the debate. The National Black Chamber of Commerce has said the DOL regulations will likely result in fewer commission-based services in the marketplace, leaving only fee-based and managed account services that are not affordable options for many individuals in our communities. Primerica's African American Leadership Council was more blunt. Quote, as a result of the proposed rule, African American families will have less opportunity to advise on their retirement goals because the lower cost commission-based services they benefit from today will no longer be available for IRAs. And if I could hearken back to what you spoke about, Mr. Cole, I mean, I just think within less than a generation, competition, innovation, transparency has led us to a point where you can make a trade for $7.95. Anybody with a modest account can now get somebody on the other end of the line and talk about these trades. I'm trying to live it down, but I'm actually a reformed lawyer. And although I worked my way through undergraduate school, I inherited a small amount of stock. And in 1980, I had to sell some of that, and I paid over $100. In an inflation-adjusted basis, that's probably, who knows, maybe $200. But thanks to competition, innovation, in a marketplace that the DOL is trying to outlaw, I could have made that same trade now for $7.95. And that's amazing, and we should protect it.
You can get some very good advice on the other end of the lines for practically nothing, or in some cases, for nothing. You know, I know we got a tight clock consideration, so I yield back, Mr. Chairman, but I just feel very strongly about this. Thanks for moving the legislation.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. It's time, gentleman, Massachusetts recognized.
Yeah, well, again, I'll just reemphasize that we don't have a final rule yet, and everybody's all having a panic attack. But putting that aside, I'll be candid with you. I've had people come into my office who have expressed concern over the potential direction that this rulemaking might go, and we've been engaged with the Department of Labor, and quite frankly, they have been responsive, and we'll see what they come up with. But some of the concerns that were raised to me by individuals and by people in the industry have, I thought were legitimate concerns, and we passed them along, and we'll see how this all works out. But, we're not going to, everybody already has their position here. I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record, though, a number of organizations. Ms. Waters began to list some of them, but some substantial organizations that are opposed to this bill coming forward. And I guess I just asked,
Without objection,
I just
we'll do
asked the
that,
question to my friends here. I mean, this is the Rules Committee. No one talked about. Are we for an open rule? Is the chairman for an open rule?
I'm sorry, I was having a
Yeah,
conversation with my
we're the Rules
staff.
Committee, so other amendments may have members may have amendments they want to offer. By that, I should ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the testimony of Congressman Stephen Lynch from Massachusetts, who has an amendment. Others may too. Are you for an open rule?
Oh, I'm generally in favor of that, but I'm also in favor of not advising the Rules Committee how to do their business.
I find it somewhat odd that people come to testify before the Rules Committee and have no opinion on the rule. I think it would be helpful for us if you did, and I think we ought to have an open rule.
Well, I wasn't seeking the advice of the Rules Committee on running the Financial Services.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you've asked for a structured rule.
Actually, you did have an opinion. You asked for a structured rule. So I think it's incorrect to say you don't come before and the Rules Committee and.
Well, it's my understanding only one amendment has been submitted.
Yeah, well, there may be many more, but nonetheless, I hope we can have an open rule because, Again, it's something we haven't seen a lot of in this Congress, notwithstanding the promise of your leadership. Ms. Waters?
Right, Mr. McGovern, I am advocating for an open rule.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's very important. And while I'm speaking, you have a list of organizations. You talked about some who had come into your office. I think many of these members have heard of the Coalition of Financial Planning Board, Financial Planning Coalition. These are investment advisors who are supportive of the DOL, and they would oppose this bill.
Yeah, and let me just say for the record, I mean, if the DOL comes up with a lousy rule that I think doesn't, doesn't reflect some of the concerns that my constituents have had, I would maybe vote for legislation. But we're not at that point yet, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burke's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member for bringing this legislation to us. I hear a lot about this at home. Like Mr. Cole, I've not heard from anybody who is for it. I think Mr. Cole did a good job of sort of summarizing the concerns that I hear from his constituents back home. I am actually gratified to hear that he was going to defund the implementation, so that gives me a good bit of relief. But this is by far the better way to do it through the legislative process. So I thank our members for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Florida, Judge Chase, is recognized.
Thank you very
Yes, sir.
much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGovern already entered into the record the Statement of Administration Policy, and I would like to call from it one paragraph and ask Mr. Hensarling if you would be so kind as to react to that paragraph. He says, under existing outdated rules, savers cannot count on receiving the unbiased advice that they need and expect. This bill would effectively block action to protect working and middle-class families from the harmful conflicts of interest that lead to biased advice. The Council of Economic Advisors estimates that these conflicts cost savers $17 billion every year. I don't know the Council of Economic Advisors. I don't swear by them or against them, but at least somebody's on record saying that there will be loss to consumers. And what's your reaction to that?
Well, the Department of Labor, once again, in a 2011 study, says investors who do not receive professional advice lose over $100 billion a year. And we know, again, from the UK passing a similar law, that people lost their professional advisor. You do not protect consumers by taking away their professional advisors. You don't protect consumers by raising their fees. And again, by an order of magnitude, 10 times greater the loss from losing the professional advice in the first place. And we have yet to hear evidence that the current rules dealing with conflicts of interest, dealing with disclosure under FINRA are in any way inadequate. I would welcome such testimony if it's something that our committee needs to look into again. But as I said earlier, I don't recall the Democratic witness at our hearing dealing with this bill criticizing FINRA's rule in the first place. Again, if you have a small amount of money under management, you're going to lose professional advice. That is the real world history, and I just don't think that's any way to help low and moderate income people who are trying to save for retirement.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before I ask Ms. Waters to react, the Department of Labor, before promulgating their rules, I had a substantial number of interactions with people, and I'm curious whether the Securities Exchange Committee can show a comparable amount of hearings or interactions or requests for comments on the subject at hand. Do you know?
Well, I haven't looked precisely comparing one beside the other, but I know that it is the core competency of the Securities and Exchange Commission and has been since the 1930s. It is not the core competency of the Department of Labor, which is why I think, once again, you've had such a violent reaction among many people against this rule, because it is not well thought out. And while some of you may be optimistic of what the final rule may be, I think it's incredibly telling that DOL has refused to repropose the rule, to open it up yet again for public comment. And so they're circumventing the process. So it'll come down as an edict. And again, I think hundreds of thousands, if not millions, can lose their investment advisor at that time. And we ought to step in and prevent it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Waters, please.
Yes, Mr. Hastings, I want to deal with something that my chairman just said about the UK, and that they had not had any witness testimony showing that somehow investors, you know, are being harmed under the system that we're working on. The UK adopted similar reforms, and those reforms have had an adverse effect on investors. That's what Mr. The chairman is saying. Both of these claims are false. The UK reforms are not similar to the department's proposed reforms. For example, the UK banned product-based commissions. As it is clear in the department's proposal and as explained above, the department has not proposed to ban commissions. Broker-dealers will continue to be permitted to charge commissions. There is also strong advice that the UK reforms have had a positive net effect on advice. This was Democratic witness testimony in committee. I don't know where the chairman was when we had these witnesses, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that. And also, Mr. Hastings, were you referring to, and I might have missed it, the Financial Planning Council? Oh, because you did submit their letter to the record. Is this the same letter?
No.
Okay, I'd like to get unanimous consent to submit to the record.
Without objection, if the
The
gentleman would
Financial
like to
Planning
enter the record
Coalition's
anything she's
letter.
brought in writing, I'll be glad to put in the record. And
Thank you,
stenographer has
Mr.
agreed.
Hastings, and continuing. This was a letter from Financial Planning Coalition to oppose 1090, the Retail Investor Protection Act, to the members of the House of Representatives Financial Services Committee. The Financial Planning Coalition, which is comprised of the Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, the Financial Planning Association, and the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, supports the Department of Labor's efforts to strengthen protections for working families and retirees by requiring the financial advisors they turn to for retirement investment advice to act in their best interest. While these are modifications and clarifications that are needed to make it more operational for advisors, the DOL's proposed rule is long overdue. I'd like to.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chairman, the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, that the rule is opposed by brokerage firms and insurance companies and mutual fund providers. Brokerage firms don't set up shop in too many of the places that I represent. Insurance companies have taken advantage of people for many years, and I could cite to you classic examples of abuse of poor people with reference to insurance. These people seem to worry that it's going to make it difficult for them to make lucrative financial products that come with high fees, while adding to the cost of new disclosure requirements and procedures. And I just don't understand why it would be difficult for them to allow their ratio to be transparently understood by those with whom they deal, in order for there not to be conflicts. But I gather that this is the way of the world, and poor people will take it on the chin again. And that just seems to be the way that we are working here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd advise the members of this committee were attempting to make a 6 o'clock deadline that would be downstairs, and I know I don't really want to have to call back our witnesses. With that said, the gentleman from the Rules Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Stiber, is recognized.
I'll be very brief. A lot of
sir.
the points have already been made, Mr. Chairman. I had in my district, an investor protection seminar put on by the State Department of Commerce and FINRA. I had literally over 100 people walk up to me concerned about this rule, that it was good because they're low and moderate income investors that have mostly 401k assets. They're really worried about what this means. So I appreciate you looking out for them, because I am afraid, as Mr. Hastings said, that poor people are going to take it on the chin unless we act here. So I do think a coordinated approach makes sense. You did say, in answer to the gentleman from Colorado, that you thought that the lack of device and higher costs and limited options were one of the outcomes and one of the reasons why we needed to act now. The only other thing you didn't talk about is how we'd have a bifurcated system for cash accounts versus retirement accounts that'll make it more expensive and complicated for everybody to comply. Why shouldn't we have a coordinated approach that treats everybody the same at the same time? If you want to expand on that, I won't ask any more questions.
Exceedingly briefly, you're right, and for being such a wonderful member of our committee, you're right to bring that up. But what we'd have is a bifurcated system between those who have funds in retirement accounts, those who do not, making the entire system more complex, more expensive. Again, a bifurcated rulemaking that probably makes no sense for the market whatsoever. And again, we ought to just let the investors choose. There's different models, different affordability, let investors choose. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. I'd just like to add one more thing to the record. A letter from House Democrats that urged changes in the rule because they didn't want disproportionate impact on lower and middle income communities or to raise the cost of retirement savings. That was from 9 Democrats that wrote to Secretary Perez. I know that other people around the table, especially on the other side of the aisle, have said the Department of Labor has been receptive to changes, but we don't know that because they haven't reproposed anything. We haven't seen anything. And, I'm not trying to be a pessimist here. I'd just like to see that they're really responsive. I'd like them to repropose, and I'd love them to do it in coordination with the SEC. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does any other member seek time? Gentleman does not seek time. Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Hope that they'll leave anything they haven't right. Yes, ma'am.
Unanimous consent to insert into the record.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. If you'll just leave that for the stenographers. We have two of the very finest stenographers who are here today, and I want to thank each of you very much. And thank you very much. We now will move Mr. Halpern in place. Mr. Halpern will prepare himself accordingly. I want to thank both the witnesses for being here, and the chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Grand Public Community, North Carolina, Vice Chairman of the committee, Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 1090, the Retail Investor Protection Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided, controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 114-31 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes an order only amendment printed in the Rule Committee report if offered by Representative Lynch of Massachusetts or his designee, which shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided, controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction.
You now heard the motion. The gentleman from North Carolina is there an amendment or discussion? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I have an
recognized.
amendment to the rule. I move that the committee grant H.R. 1090 an open rule so all members have an opportunity to offer their amendments to the bill on the floor.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the amendment. Is there a discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Noes have it, noes have it. Gentleman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? No. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stiver?
No.
Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? No. Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to make a point on H.R. 1090. The rule provides for consideration of a bill in a structure process and makes in order the only amendment that was submitted to the Rules Committee. And this rule deserves all the members' support.
Thank you very much. It's a very good point about how really great this bill is, one that's well understood not only by the members, but thoughtfully by members of the public who have visited our offices, made sure we know that. So the,
If I could just respond, simply saying, I think a
gentleman's
lot of people
recognized.
weren't quite sure this bill was coming up today. And so I think that, there's a case to be made that members should have the freedom and the ability to amend bills on the House floor. And that's what an open rule is all about. And it used to be what you guys were for.
The amendment deadline on this bill was a few days ago.
You used to be for open rules, but I guess no longer.
Yes, sir.
You changed your mind.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The
Ask
ayes
for a
have
roll
it.
call,
Gentleman
Mr.
asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report total.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and will be handled by the gentleman, Mr. Collins, for Republicans.
And I will be handing it for the
Mr.
Democrats.
Polis for Democrats. I want to thank everybody. At this point, I do not have anything scheduled for the remainder of the week, but I would hold us in obeyance of that, knowing that we have work that has to be done. I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Wayne T. Frankie, for being here, one of the greatest Texans who's visiting me today. I want to thank the committee for their attention. This now finishes our work for the day.